Final numbers right now. How many people were displaced? How many homes were damaged? How many homes have been rebuilt? How much of that is Brad Pitt? How much is ACORN? How much is the city? How much did FEMA come in and after you dried out the homes? Do you have the numbers on just percentage terms? Not the absolute numbers.
Well, more than 80%.
The absolute numbers on the destruction and then the percentage on recovery.
Well, let me see if I can rise to this challenge.
All right.
So, more than 80% of the homes flooded.
Okay.
So, the city at the point of the flood had roughly 485,000 people. So, 85% of those people were in homes that flooded, down to what was essentially the 1825 footprint of the city, which is along any of the ridges or in the alluvial floodplain of the river. So Algiers across the river on the west bank of the river did not flood at all. But the hurricane, even without floods, I mean, our office didn't flood. We were in high ground. My home didn't flood. But if you lost a roof because of wind, it was a very serious hurricane. So even past that, it could take you 2-3 months to get back in, just because there's water damage coming to the roof. You got to still do what you have to do to repair your home. So that's that number. At this point, we are still we are somewhere between 385 and 400,000 in population. So, and there's a disagreement now as the years go by. Were we 485 or were we 465 at the point of the storm? But essentially, we're now somewhere between 385 and 400,000 people. Some of that is new population. Some of it is we in some communities, the neighborhood I happen to live in when I moved in 1980 to that neighborhood, and certainly as recently as the last census in 2000, was 2/3 African American or Latino and only 1/3 Caucasian. Now that neighborhood in Irish Channel, which also didn't flood, Mid-City, which also didn't flood, which is where the coffee house is, all the statistics have flipped over. Now those neighborhoods are 65% Caucasian and only 1/3, 35% Latino and African American. Overnight, because they didn't flood, property values went through the roof. So a shotgun double catty corner from where my house was, it would have sold for $75,000 before the storm, all of a sudden sells for $325,000 within 2 months of the storm because it didn't flood. People were desperate for housing. You were moving to high ground. All of a sudden my house was worth something because it didn't flood. And so that means I now pay a huge amount of property taxes compared to what I paid. But I want to, as a productive citizen in a productive democracy, I want to pay my full share of this regressive tax burden, and I do. Brad Pitt, 75 houses, period. That's all the houses that have been built. They still do these massive fundraisers because at a cost, he's had to step back from every house being unique and sort of use some of the architectural plans more than once, because you can't really keep building houses in a low-income African-American neighborhood for $300,000 a piece that only sell for $125,000, $150,000 subsidized. So that's a pretty good deal. There are literally we know somebody who lives in a house that is a very well-known house right along the river in the lower Ninth Ward, who's moving to a Brad Pitt house because how can you beat that deal, essentially? Get a $300,000 house for $125,000, and why should I be trying to keep up? She lives in what's called a steamboat house, which is 2 houses that are almost identical. They're often in pictorial histories in New Orleans. It was built by a ship captain, so it looks like the pilot's part, and you get up to the 3rd floor and you're looking over the levee at all the ships. It'd be a wonderful house to live in. But how can you beat living in a 300, So she's going to move over to the other part of the lower Ninth Ward, not Holy Cross by the river, but. So that's not insignificant, but it's only 75 houses. That's not a
And
mass.
it's all in the Ninth Ward?
Right, and all in the lower Ninth Ward, not in the Holy Cross historic area,
Okay.
and that's part of what we forced.
And all those houses that you got stripped down to dry out, did FEMA come in? Are those rebuilt?
They're in the process. I mean, those were 5,000 houses at the end of the day that are in the process of being rebuilt. Not all of them have been rebuilt. Some of them are still waiting for money. So we had to do the gutting program in the first 2 years after the storm. So that was between 2005 and 2007. The subprime market collapsed in late 2007. So the whole structure was you put the road home money was you got your insurance money, you coupled that with your road home money, and then there was still going to be a gap of somewhere around $35,000 to $40,000 on what average construction cost was, new or rebuilding, to get to $125,000 on the normal footprint of a house. Well, for lower income families that didn't have good credit, the subprime market meant you were essentially helping people borrow $25,000, $35,000 to finish the house. When the subprime market disappeared, that obviously slowed people down. And the road home money did not get fully distributed until almost 2009. So all of that and the construction problems delayed everything about rebuilding the city. Finally, people all have whatever the road home money is, but many people had insurance money. Talking about low-income working families, there's never quite enough month as there is money. So in many cases, the insurance money handled health bills, burials, school costs, whatever, wasn't really there anymore by the time people got their road home money. So there's still probably, there's disagreement on these figures, but there's not an insignificant number of people who got road home money who had 2 years to rebuild, who now 3-4 years later have not rebuilt their houses. Probably 35,000 of that population is represented in those families.
And the 5,000 homes that you did do the dry out on, what percentage of the flooded homes or hurt homes in the Ninth Ward was that? Is that most of them, or?
Well, of that 5,000, they were pretty widely distributed, and there's actually a chart here that shows where they were done, so you can see. But maybe 1,000 of those homes were in the lower Ninth Ward. Maybe in the Ninth Ward in general, 1,500
homes.
Yeah.
So okay.
But literally anywhere that flooded, Seabrook, Gentilly, anywhere that flooded, that people needed help trying to get their house back. I mean, 85% of the homes in the city flooded. So if you look at that map, they did the gutting program with members and others all over the city.
So
but a lot of them were
90+% on the